In 2023, in Phoenix, Arizona, Elena Ramirez stood barefoot in her kitchen holding a rejection email on her phone, while a cardboard folder marked Down Payment Fund sat open on the table beside her. They had offered $22,000 over asking. They had waived repairs. They had already picked out which bedroom would become the nursery. The house sold in 6 hours to an LLC that paid cash. 31 days later, the same house reappeared online for rent at $3,400 a month. That was $900 more than Elena and her husband had expected their mortgage payment to be. One missed payment, one rejected bid, 5 years of savings turned into somebody else's yield. Most people still believe this is just a bad housing cycle. Interest rates went up. Prices got too high. Eventually, things will cool down. Families who waited patiently will finally catch a break. That belief depends on one assumption: that the people buying homes still want to live in them. But something changed. Across large parts of America, the bidder standing across from an ordinary family is no longer another family. It is a corporation with software, private financing, data models, and the ability to lose money for years in exchange for controlling the neighborhood later. A teacher and a nurse might spend 7 years saving $60,000 for a down payment. A private equity fund can raise $600 million in a week. A family needs a mortgage approval, an inspection, and time off work to attend a showing. An algorithm can identify a target zip code, calculate future rent growth, and submit a cash offer in 12 minutes. The public story says this is temporary. High rates, low inventory, bad timing. Wait long enough, and the market will normalize. But the forensic reality is harder to admit. For some of the largest firms in the country, houses are no longer shelter. They are infrastructure. They are treated the way previous generations treated railroads, pipelines, or toll roads, assets that produce predictable cash flow every month. And once a company realizes a 3-bedroom house can generate rent for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, there is very little reason to ever sell it back. That is why so many people feel trapped by something they cannot fully explain. The salary went up, the savings account grew, the number stayed the same, the purchasing power disappeared. And behind that quiet feeling is a larger question that most people still do not want to ask. What happens to a country when the middle class no longer owns the ground beneath its feet? In 1894, just south of Chicago, a factory worker named Thomas Donnelly walked home through the town of Pullman carrying half a loaf of bread and a rent notice he could no longer afford. The streets were clean, the houses looked orderly, the lawns were trimmed. From a distance, Pullman looked like the model American town. But George Pullman did not just own the factory where the workers made railroad cars. He owned the houses. He owned the stores. He owned the church pews. He owned the library. When business slowed during the Depression of the 1890s, wages were cut by as much as 25%. Rent did not move. A worker who had earned $2.000 a day suddenly earned $1.50. But the landlord, employer, and company store owner were all the same man. The workers could not negotiate because there was nowhere else to go. That is the part people forget about: feudal systems. They are not built on chains. They are built on dependency. The worker in Pullman did not technically belong to the company, but his paycheck came from it. His house belonged to it. His food came through it. His future depended on it. And once all of those systems merged together, the worker stopped being a citizen in a market. He became a tenant inside somebody else's machine. The modern version looks cleaner. There are no factory smokestacks. There are no company-owned uniforms. There is no company script. Instead, there are investor-owned subdivisions in Phoenix, Atlanta, Dallas, Tampa, Charlotte. A family loses a bid on a house. An LLC buys it. 3 weeks later, the same family tours the property as renters. They walk through the kitchen they almost own. They stand in the backyard where they imagine birthdays, graduations, dogs, grandchildren. Now there is a property management sign in the yard. The monthly payment is higher. The application fee is non-refundable. The PEC deposit is extra. The lease renewal will increase next year. This is the contradiction at the center of the modern housing market. People are told they are free because they can move, but moving gets more expensive every year. People are told they are free because they can rent elsewhere, but entire neighborhoods are increasingly owned by the same handful of institutional landlords. People are told to wait for prices to come down, but if private equity can buy thousands of homes during every downturn, then every housing crash becomes another acquisition opportunity for the people who already own everything. That is why the comparison to Pullman matters. Not because today looks identical, because the underlying incentive is the same. Control the job market, control the housing, control the alternatives, and eventually, people stop building wealth. They start paying tribute. 1. Rent payment. 1. Renewal fee. 1. Late charge, year after year. And the most dangerous part is that many people still think this is temporary. In 2021, a leasing agent in Nashville opened her laptop on a Tuesday morning and watched the rent recommendation change in real time. The software suggested a 14% increase, not because the building had improved, not because wages had risen, not because maintenance costs had doubled, because nearby landlords were also raising rents. The recommendation came from an algorithm. The same type of software was being used across thousands of apartment complexes and rental portfolios in multiple cities at the same time. That is where the housing story becomes stranger. Most people imagine landlords setting rent the old-fashioned way. They look at the neighborhood, they compare a few listings, they try to find a number that fills the unit quickly, but algorithmic pricing changes the incentive. A vacant apartment is no longer seen as a problem if holding out produces higher rents across the portfolio. An empty unit for 2 months can be worth it if the next tenant pays 18% more for the next 3 years. 1 empty apartment becomes acceptable. 10 empty apartments become strategy. A family sees a vacant building and assumes rents will fall. Instead, the units stay empty while prices keep rising. That feels irrational because it is irrational for a local landlord trying to pay the mortgage. It is perfectly rational for a large firm managing 40,000 units across multiple states. The hidden rule is simple. Occupancy matters less than yield. The old landlord wanted every apartment filled. The new landlord wants every apartment maximally monetized. That shift changes everything. A nurse in Atlanta sees her rent jump from $1,650 to $2,050 in 1 year. Her raise was 4%. Her rent increase was 24%. The number stayed the same. The purchasing power disappeared. She cuts back on groceries. She cancels a family trip. She delays replacing the tires on her car. Then the lease renewal notice arrives with a 7-day deadline and a $300 administrative fee. She pays because moving costs even more. First month, last month, security deposit, truck rental, utility transfer fees, 1 signature, $4,000 gone. This is where people begin to misunderstand what is happening. They think they are competing with the market. In reality, they are competing with coordinated data systems that can identify exactly how much pain a tenant can absorb before leaving. Not maximum fairness, maximum extraction. And because many of the largest firms are using similar software, similar models, and similar rent growth assumptions, entire neighborhoods begin moving in the same direction at once. Different logos, different websites, different leasing offices, the same price increase, the same fees, the same shrinking margin for error. That is why ordinary people increasingly feel like there is nowhere cheaper to go. Because in many cities, there is not. The market still looks competitive from the outside. 10 apartment buildings, 10 landlords, 10 websites. But underneath, the pricing engine is often telling all of them the same thing. Raise the rent, hold the line, wait for desperation. Mark and Elena did everything they were told to do. They lived in a smaller apartment than they wanted. They drove used cars. They skipped vacations. For 5 years, every extra dollar went into a savings account labeled house. By 2024, they had saved $78,000. That should have been enough for a modest starter home in the outer suburbs. Instead, it bought them disappointment. The first house they bid on listed for $410,000. They offered $430,000. The winning bid was $465,000 in cash from an LLC registered in another state. The second house sold before they could even schedule a showing. The third had 37 offers in 3 days. The fourth looked promising until their agent quietly explained what informational-only inspection meant. Waive repairs, waive leverage, waive the right to complain later. In other words, take all the risk yourself. This is where the middle class gets trapped, not because they are irresponsible. Because they are responsible. They follow the rules in a market increasingly designed for people who do not need to. A family has to think about mold, wiring, termites, roof damage, school districts, commute times, mortgage rates, daycare costs. An institutional buyer thinks about none of those things. It thinks in terms of spreadsheets. Expected rent growth, maintenance reserves, portfolio concentration, yield per zip code. The family sees a home. The corporation sees a bond with a kitchen attached. That difference matters because it changes what winning looks like. For Mark and Elena, winning meant stability, For the investor, winning meant controlling one more property in a neighborhood where rents were already climbing. A month after losing the bidding war, Mart found the same house online again. Same front yard, same white fence, same kitchen Elena had already imagined repainting. Now it was listed for rent at $3,250 a month. Their estimated mortgage payment would have been around $2,400. They stared at the screen in silence. The house had not become more valuable in 30 days. The family had simply become more desperate. That is the hidden tax inside this system. You do not just lose the chance to buy. You lose the chance to stabilize your housing cost. You lose the chance to lock in a payment while inflation keeps moving. You lose the chance to build equity. And over 10 years, that difference becomes enormous. A homeowner making a fixed mortgage payment may still be paying around $2,400 a month a decade later. The renter may be paying $3,800, then $4,200, then more than half their income. One generation builds wealth through ownership. The next generation sends the money somewhere else. That is why housing feels different now. People are not just being priced out of homes. They are being priced into a lifetime subscription model for shelter. And the cruelest part is that the people most likely to get trapped are often the ones who did everything right. In 2025, in Tampa, Florida, a retired electrician named David Mercer sat at his kitchen table turning over his wedding ring while an unopened property tax bill rested beside his coffee cup. His mortgage had been paid off for 3 years. He thought that meant safety. Instead, his homeowner's insurance jumped from $2,800 a year to $6,900. His property taxes rose another 18%. A new roof quote came back at $24,000. His pension check stayed exactly the same. He stared at the bill for a long time before finally turning down the heat and telling his wife they would wait another winter before replacing the water heater. That is the next stage of this system. Even the people who still own are increasingly being squeezed into behaving like renters. The old promise of homeownership was simple. You sacrificed early so life would become more stable later. But now the hidden costs keep moving. Insurance premiums, maintenance, taxes, HOA fees, utility bills, special assessments. The house is technically yours. The payment never stops. That is one of the reasons private equity loves residential housing so much. Shelter is not optional. People can stop buying new cars. They can cancel vacations. They can skip restaurants, but they cannot stop paying to exist somewhere. And when housing absorbs 40%, 50%, even 60% of a household budget, every other part of life begins to shrink. A couple delays having children because daycare plus rent would cost more than one salary. A man in Charlotte keeps driving the same pickup truck with 220,000 miles because his lease renewal increased by $450 a month. A nurse in Phoenix starts cutting her prescription pills in half because her rent went up another $300 and her electric bill is already overdue. One electric bill, one prescription bottle, one grocery cart with half the food for twice the cost. This is where the emotional damage becomes harder to measure than the financial damage. People stop feeling like adults. They stop feeling like they are moving forward. A 34-year-old engineer with a 6-figure income moves back in with his parents. A married couple postpones having a second child because they cannot afford another bedroom. Friends stop hosting dinners because they are embarrassed by how small their apartment is. People who followed every rule begin feeling like failures inside a system designed to make them fail. The belief is that serfdom disappeared centuries ago. The reality is that serfdom never required chains. It only required a population that could never accumulate enough property to become independent. In medieval Europe, peasants worked land they did not own and paid a lord for the right to stay there. Today, many workers spend 30 years making rent payments larger than a mortgage would have been, while building no equity, no stability, and no leverage. The logos changed, the apps changed, the language became cleaner, but the underlying relationship is becoming familiar again. A small ownership class controls the land. Everyone else pays for access. And once enough homes are concentrated into enough hands, the danger is no longer just financial. It becomes political. A population that rents everything has less freedom to quit, less freedom to move, less freedom to resist, and less freedom to absorb a crisis. Because when your landlord owns the house, the neighborhood, and sometimes half the zip-tied cold, losing one paycheck no longer feels like a setback. It feels like exile. That is why the system is so hard to fix. The people benefiting from it are not waiting for prices to come down. They are waiting for more people to give up. Every housing downturn becomes a buying opportunity. Every foreclosure becomes inventory. Every family that delays ownership for another 5 years becomes another reliable stream of rent. The political language around housing still sounds temporary. Starter homes, affordable housing, market corrections. But the underlying structure is becoming permanent, and once enough homes are owned by institutions, they gain something more valuable than appreciation. They gain leverage. They can wait longer than you. They can borrow cheaper than you. They can survive vacancies longer than you. They can lose money in the short term if it helps them control the market later. That means the people who adapt are usually not the people chasing the most competitive zip codes or waiting for the perfect moment. They are the people looking for the cracks in the system. Small towns where local governments block institutional ownership, counties with strict limits on short-term rentals, community land trusts, direct-to-owner purchases before a property ever hits the algorithmic bidding platforms, a family friend selling quietly, a tired landlord retiring, a house with bad photos and no staging, a municipality nobody on Wall Street cares about yet. Those are not magical solutions. They are simply places where the machines are weaker. Because the final hidden truth is this: the market feels unbeatable when you are competing where everyone else is looking. It becomes more human when you stop competing on their terms. The danger is real. But the trap is believing there is only one path left. There is not. There are still places where ownership is possible. There are still communities fighting institutional consolidation. There are still local officials trying to stop entire neighborhoods from becoming rental portfolios, but those windows tend to close quietly, and they usually close before the headlines catch up. One family notices first. One family buys before the investors arrive. One family gets the deed. The next family gets the lease. If you want to understand where those cracks still exist, where corporate ownership is weakest, and how ordinary buyers are bypassing the algorithms, that is where you should look next.